Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Khym.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration. If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restoretheglory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory. Hey, Bob. Good to see you. It's been a while. We're back from a summer break. You're looking tanned as ever, living in Florida with, you were boogie boarding all summer, weren't you?
Yeah. Are you making fun of my white skin living in Florida?
No, I didn't even think about that. I was just imagining you surfing and carving waves and swimming amongst the sharks.
Right.
So we had a summer break. So listeners, thanks for sticking it out with us. We could talk about that maybe another time, but
yeah.
As we always do.
Speaking of which, we were on a motorcycle trip.
That was an amazing trip. Oh, that was a blessed trip with a former guest of ours. I went with him and some priests and there was more clergy than lay people on this motorcycle trip. It was fantastic. So shout out to all our motorcycle listeners out there. So Bob, we wanted to start off this next episode. It feels like a new season, even though we don't do seasons. But anyway, with the topic that I love to break open with you, and I feel like it's a conversation we could have over and over, and we probably will. It's a continual conversation because we're always growing and learning. And so here it is. What is healing? What is healing? Because the whole podcast is about restoring the glory, which another way, that's, a fancy way to maybe say healing. And what I've noticed is, all the years of me doing this kind of work, et cetera, there's a lot of different definitions floating around out there. And something that I've noticed about you is, having done the courses with you and the podcast and knowing you quite well, I think you have a definition, and I think I have a sense of the definition. And I don't know if a lot of people appreciate the thought and work that have brought you to that definition. And I think it might be different than what a lot of people walk around thinking when they think about healing. So if it's cool, let's break all of that down and at least take another step in the conversation here of what is healing. So right at the gate, Bob, what strikes you about that?
Yeah, good topic.
Okay.
Immediately what comes to mind is the quote that I use in Healing the Whole Person, which is from Pope Benedict XVI.
Yeah.
I think I was already there before I saw the quote, but it certainly reinforced and expanded my notion. And the quote is, in Jesus of Nazareth, where he's studying Jesus' healing ministry, and he's talking about the disciples being called to heal. And he's talking about that healing is more than just the relieving of human suffering. And he says something to the effect of healing is an essential dimension of the apostolic mission. Mm. And when understand at a sufficiently deep level, it expresses the entire content of redemption.
Yeah.
Right? So It's not a side issue on the church. It's not, just this group has healing masses, or this group has healing prayer, or healing takes place with doctors, or healing takes place with therapists, or healing takes place in the sacraments of healing. But every sacrament is a sacrament of healing. Mm-hmm. All the teaching of the church is a healing. All the social justice in the church is a healing. Mm-hmm. Everything we do every day is a part of that fundamental restoring of our glory as human beings, of the glory of the church, the glory of the family, the glory, and I think about, you can tell you touch a passion here when you ask me this question,
that's
right?
Why I asked it. Yeah.
Where we started our ministry of John Paul II Healing Center was in the inspiration of John Paul II's teaching, and Pope Benedict, who took his teaching and really laid it out in depth, which is the teaching of the church, teaching of Jesus. But it was really looking at, and this is where the term restoring the glory comes from in my heart. Where is God's glory revealed, most especially in the world? And if you study the scriptures, which John Paul II, everything he did was based on the scripture and the teaching of the church as an interpretation of that. Every individual person reveals the glory of God. Amen. Man fully alive. The glory of God is man fully alive. That the dignity of man made in the image and likeness of God is our glory. It's God's glory revealed in us.
Yes.
So every individual person carries with them an image of the glory of God that needs to be restored because of the fall. Right? Second, God designed the family to reveal his glory, right? Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church.
Yeah.
God uses that image of marriage all the way through Scripture as a revelation of his love. And so marriage and the family, the domestic church, is the place that is primarily called to nurture that image of God's glory and to bring every person into that glory. And then the third level is the church itself, right? Those three places on earth are meant to reveal God's glory. And all three of those places, as we know, are in great need of restoration, in great need of healing, always, constantly. And so it's the essential dimension of the apostolic mission is to restore the glory of every human person, restore the glory of family, marriage, and restore the glory of the priesthood, the religious life, laity, the church, and all that it represents. So, is that more than you asked for?
Oh yeah, that's it. That's healing. Yeah. This is exactly where I wanted to go. And I had a hunch this is where you were going to go. Again, we don't script our episodes. So here's what I think the average Joe and Jane in the pew think healing is, or at least they have this notion, and that's what I'm trying to press into. Because if we don't understand what healing is, it can almost backfire. And so let me explain. I think a lot of us walk around and we think that healing is the removal of suffering. But we've never thought about it outside of that parameter. So most people, when they share a story of healing, what they're explaining is, I once had this difficulty or problem, emotional problem or pain, physical problem or pain, spiritual problem, pain, etc. God intervened, problem no longer there.
Yeah.
That is healing. I had a problem, the problem went away. That's what we define as healing. And so then the dilemma comes in, what if the problem stays, then it must not be healing's not occurring. Something's going wrong. And that's where a lot of people, I think, get tripped up. And so and you and I have experienced this.
Yep.
We've seen tons of examples of this where the phrase of it's not working.
Yeah.
It's not working. Something's going wrong. It's not working. It's not working. And when we press into what's not working, the problem isn't going away.
Yeah. My pain is still here.
My pain's still here. And so this is why the definition of healing is very, very important, because imagine for a moment that the pain is facilitating healing.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people go, hold on, that's not, something's wrong there. But this is the point, because when you place it within the apostolic mission and the entire content of redemption, we have to look at Jesus. And when you look at Jesus, the most powerful thing he did is the Paschal mystery, his passion, death, resurrection, and ascension. Step one was passion. There was not a detour. There's no bypassing that. It was an essential dimension of redemption.
Yes.
Was suffering. And he asked if it could not be there, Jesus to the Father.
Right.
And he abandoned himself to the Father's will. And so when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, we can expect different sections of the road.
Yeah.
A passion part of the road, a death part of the road, a resurrection part of the road, and an ascension part of the road. And to me, that's what healing is. And so we still are almost turning over this question of going, well, what is it then?
Yeah.
Because what is it if it's not taking away my problems?
And again, I think we don't want to minimize the desire, the natural, healthy desire we have
Amen.
to deal with our suffering and to deal with the things that cause us pain and difficulty and relationships and everything else.
Because it's also not healing to just walk around with your cross for your entirety of your life.
Correct.
That's also not walking the full road. And I think people can get stuck in various sections of the way or the road that I'm laying out here in the Paschal Mystery. You walk around the cross 24/7 and going, I find an identity in the suffering.
Yeah, and in a wrong way, in a way that's not life-giving.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I think of Sister Miriam, who teaches with us, and she says we all have to live all the mysteries of the Rosary. All the mysteries of Christ's life. Right? We all have joyful mysteries. We all have luminous mysteries. We all have sorrowful mysteries, and we all have glorious mysteries. And we need to. Healing is living in the fullness of those. As you said, we don't stay on the cross. We don't stay in the sorrowful mysteries.
Yes.
We don't stay in the joyful mysteries. We don't stay in the illuminate. We live in all of them. We live in the fullness of those over and over again.
Yes.
Until everything is joyful and glorious and no more suffering. Yes. And that's the final healing.
Yes. So isn't it interesting? Because it starts to, I would imagine people are probably going, what? Like I'm more confused than when we started but this is important. This is why I want to break this down. So in healing as Jesus intended it, suffering does go away. Suffering was never part of God's original plan. It's the effect of the fall.
Yes.
But it can be redemptive.
Yes.
And so what I'm trying to do is keep digging down to something to where we can hold this truth about what healing is. And then people can go, oh, and then everything else spins and grows off of that. So let me take a stab at it, and we'll probably refine it. Healing is the restoration of our God-given glory.
Yes.
So how do I know I was healed? My God-given glory was restored. The family's God-given glory was restored. The church's God-given glory was restored. The process of healing might involve suffering. It might involve glorious, sorrowful, luminous, all those mysteries that are involved in it. But how do you know if someone's healed? God-given glory is restored. The Catechism says it this way: Jesus came to restore man to the purity of his origins, man meaning human.
Yeah.
Jesus is restoring to the purity of our origins. So healing, it can be working even though suffering is still present. And this is the genius of God.
Yeah.
God is always up to something good. That's the phrase that I use to anchor me. God's always up to something good.
Yeah.
And therefore, if something bad in my definition is happening, and I'm trusting him and I'm surrendered to him and I'm not doing anything consciously to cause the bad to happen, he must be allowing the bad to bring about a greater good. He's up to something good with the pain. The classic example that the shepherd, let me use this one, like the shepherd example. So I can't remember who shares this story. Maybe it was you who shared this story anyway. Sorry, maybe
I don't think so.
Putting things together. So a guy goes to Israel and he literally is hanging out with the literal shepherds in the Holy Land. And he wants to go check them out and see what they're all about. And so he sees there's a particular sheep that will not leave the shepherd's side. Like it won't go away from it. And the guy asks the shepherd, what's up with this sheep? All the rest of them are a bit all over. And he said, this sheep was very wayward. And it was going to get eaten. It would go so far away from the flock that it was in danger to itself. And so the shepherd says, I had to break one of his legs. And I'm like, whoa, dude, like animal cruelty. Like, what are you talking about? Like, whoa. And so he said, but it was for the sheep's good. Okay, so there we go. Interesting. He said, and then I took it and I literally put it around my shoulders. Yeah. And I carried it until it healed. And then when it healed, it got so used to being around me that it became the sheep that was closest to me. And now it never leaves within like my crook's distance, the distance of my staff, because that's just what's normal now. So why does God allow suffering, which is the classic question? Because he's bringing about a greater good. That's the only reason he would allow it. Otherwise, his goodness comes into question. We've got a massive theological issue on our hands.
Yeah. And, taking that example, the place I always wrestle a little bit was, does God break our legs?
That's the key question.
That's the key question. And I won't uniformly say he won't, but I think what breaks our legs more often than not is our wandering.
Agreed.
And the consequences of our wandering,
Right.
And so suffering as a byproduct of our sin, our collective sin, our universal sin, and then our personal sin, and then the sins of others around us, leaves us in a condition where we need restoration.
Yes.
Right?
We are fallen.
Because in that, we don't want to walk closely with him. Yes. We don't know how to walk closely with him.
Our sin is rebellion.
Yeah. We don't know how to rest on his shoulders.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's what needs to be restored because, as we've talked many times together about, the John Paul II quoting over and over again, Jesus reveals man to himself.
Yes.
And reveals the Father to man, to us. He reveals both sides. And so it's in Jesus that the restoration happens. He's the image of that glory.
Yes.
He's the fullness of that glory in human beings. Mary by grace, Joseph, the Holy Family.
Yes.
All of that's the picture. The early church, we look at images of what restoration looks like.
Yes.
But we're constantly in that process because of the fall.
Yes. I love the nuance that you're making there. Does God break our legs? That to me is the heart of the question. Or maybe let me rephrase that. That's the hardest part of the question.
Yeah, that is the hardest part.
Because it calls into question God's character.
Right.
And does God intentionally do it? I liked how you phrased it. I can't, we can't say never because we don't understand the ways of God all the time. Where I land with that is he's not a leg breaker, right? That's just not who he is. The enemy is, because he likes to see brokenness increase. And I liked how you put it that the waywardness of our hearts is what breaks us. And if you just look at your life.
Yeah.
Now, notice as well, I might have done something that quote unquote caused my leg to be broken, or something might have been done to me that I never wanted that caused my leg to be broken.
And why did God allow that is the question.
Why did God allow that? Did he do it directly? No. But did he allow it? Yes. And there's where a lot of people break down and go, I can't take this. This God is not a good God.
Right. That's what makes atheist because of their suffering. And I can't believe in a God who will let me suffer. And I've cried out to him and I haven't seen the answer to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was Bishop Barron says, this is the most difficult question when you're dealing with atheists, this suffering. It's the hardest question to tackle.
Yeah.
If, though, God is always up to something good, let's just give a caveat. The amount of trust required to accept a broken leg for a greater good is off the charts. That's a lot of trust.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, Bishop Barron refers to trust is another way to say faith.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same virtue. So if we say faith, then we're talking about a theological virtue, which is a gift. So it's something that's given to us to believe that God is always up to something good, and to stake our claim there, and to put all of all our eggs in that basket. Then, if he's up to something good, the story goes, he's bringing about a greater reality than would have happened without the suffering.
Yep.
This is why in the Easter Vigil we say, "Oh, happy fault."
Yeah.
Which is a crazy statement.
Yeah.
Like, yay, it's terrible, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's why people go, you Christians are weird, right? But it's not weird if something greater is coming about of it, from it. And that to me is, now we're into the zone of healing.
Yeah.
Healing is bringing about the greater good that's caused from the downfall of wherever and however
whatever
you
I've
call
experienced.
It.
Yeah.
Whatever I've experienced.
Yeah. So I look back on what began my conscious healing process. God was in it way before I was conscious of it.
Yeah.
But my panic attacks.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was nothing good that I felt in my panic attacks. Mm-hmm. Right? This was, and again, I now recognize there was demonic participation in that.
Sure.
I now see where that was because of what was activated, but I also see God's hand in it now looking back. Mm. I now see him allowing that, like he allowed the evil one to tempt Job.
Yes.
Because there was great good that came from those panic attacks.
Yes.
It broke me out of my pride and self-sufficiency and created a desperation where I needed help. Mm-hmm. And even though in the middle of it, I was questioning where was God and why isn't he doing anything and why is he allowing this to happen? I could see his hand looking back at how closely he was walking with me and all the circumstances of that.
Yes.
Not causing the panic attack, but allowing me to go through that really out of control, horrible experience, because it was the thing that opened me to get help, opened me to pray in a deeper way, opened me to pursue this deeper healing process, which I might have just stayed in my contentment of everything's all right and I'm great and I don't need any of that. And
the God-given glory of your life wouldn't have been fully restored. I'm hearing you say.
And it's not yet, but it's
not.
But it opened a process.
Yeah, the panic attacks facilitated the restoration of your God-given glory.
Yeah,
and you can see that now.
Yeah, and it brought me to face some deep pain that I hadn't faced, and I could say in the middle of that pain, God, where are you? Particularly in those experiences back, of reliving the pain of my dad leaving.
Right.
Right. And you're no stranger to that in your own story. And just that deep pain is like, in that deep pain of abandonment is like, God, you've abandoned me here. But the reality is it's a place where I've abandoned myself.
Break that down.
It's a place where in the pain, I've disconnected my heart. I've dissociated from the pain. Right? Actually going back into the pain is being reconnected with myself.
Wow. What you actually experienced.
Yeah. And it's reconnecting with my heart. And in that, I can experience God. God, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted.
Yes.
Those crushed in spirit. It's in those places where our walls come down and we're in that real vulnerable place, which none of us like because it feels so out of control and so helpless.
Yes.
That we can actually have an experience of God. I think I've said this before on the podcast. The people that I know that have the deepest intimacy with God, many of them have had the deepest trauma.
I agree.
They hear God so beautifully and know his presence because they've experienced it in a place of deepest need.
Amen. Bob, as you're describing that, I'm watching almost the overlay. When you have those transparency sheets back the day in school and you'd put them on top and they would match perfectly and it would look cool.
Yeah.
So as I'm hearing your story, I'm hearing the sorrowful mysteries.
Yeah.
And what's coming to mind is literally Jesus crying out, praying the Psalms on the cross, my God, why have you abandoned me?
Yeah.
Which he's representing the cry of every human.
Yep.
He's taking it all upon himself and going through the journey first to pave the way for all of us to follow.
Yeah.
And the nuances there, which are wild, if you just check the scene out for a second, there are those who are trying to persecute while we're in the suffering. Uh-huh. There are those who are trying to comfort. There are the mockers and the consolers.
Yeah.
There's the temptation, the offering of the easy route, the wine, numb. All of that is part of the process of healing.
Yeah.
And all the people you thought would be there when push comes to shove, a lot of them fade away, and there's usually a smaller number.
Yeah.
And there's often usually a deep consoler. That's, I think, a lot of the times what the therapist becomes is Our Lady.
Yeah.
In that scene,
yeah,
and maybe
beautiful.
St. John.
Yeah, beautiful.
But there's also a whole other side.
Yeah. And also inside of us, there's those mocking voices inside of us.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
There's those abandoning voices, and then there's consoling voices inside of us.
I don't know about you. This is the part where, for example, when I go, what is healing? It's living out the Paschal mystery so that God's glory is restored in me. And so there are things in me that need to die.
Yeah.
And the dying is the hardest part. It's the hardest part because in my trauma, in my pain, I adapted and I learned, I came to believe that blank, like self-reliance or pride, or those are ones you said, or whatever, are actually where I'll find life.
Mm-hmm.
And so they become my God.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't die, I am worshiping false gods.
Yeah.
And so is it loving or not loving to invite that to death? That's a really hard, but if I'm attached to it, because I believe that's where life is found, I'm in a quandary. I'm in a real dilemma now.
Yeah.
Because where does life found?
Yeah. And with compassion, we can say, well, that's self-reliance is what I needed to survive in that moment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
but
we can.
It's not life.
Yeah. It's not a long-term solution.
It's not life. And so it's the hardest thing to die because it's survival. I mean, it's what I think I need for my survival. And so if I'm holding on to that, I'm holding on to death rather than life, spiritually.
Yes.
And God wants to bring us from spiritual death to spiritual life.
Yes.
And it's the paradox because we have to die to the thing that we've found life in to get life.
Isn't that the paradox?
Right?
Yeah.
Right? And it's what he says in the gospel. Anyone who tries to find their life will lose it.
Yeah.
Anyone who tries to save their own life will lose it.
Yeah.
And he who loses their life for my sake will find it.
Yeah. And isn't that right where the enemy does most of his work?
Yep.
Is the deceiving about where you will find life.
Yep. Yeah.
And there's the Garden of Eden replayed.
Yeah.
It's these narratives which are deep into the structure and fabric of reality as God designed it. And once we see them, healing starts to take its proper position and place, and you realize, oh, it is about the entire context of redemption.
Right. Which is getting down to the roots of our existence, our soul, our person.
Yeah.
And the whole rest of the world. And this is all occult healing. This is all the healing in the world is all treating symptoms. It's all attempting to get rid of our suffering, our pain.
Yeah.
Right? And causing more pain in the process.
Yeah.
Because it's not dealing with what's causing the pain.
Yes. It's the wine on the staff given to Jesus.
Yep.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's good to have a little wine to get the...
Yeah. We don't mean this literally. Don't ever drink wine.
But no, even sometimes it's good to medicate our pain a little bit.
Yes. Yes.
Because...
Break that down so people can now it's like, what? I thought that was bad. It's the black or white thinking.
Yeah. It's, sometimes we need a little bit of that to be able to deal with what we're dealing with.
Yes.
Even though ultimately, if we could bear it like Jesus.
Yes.
And not use any medication to numb it.
Yes.
And go through the heart of that pain. Yes. Ultimately, that's the greatest freedom and the quickest way to it.
Yeah.
Right?
That's John of the Cross's way, which I think he's kind of crazy. But anyway, that's another topic.
but for most of us, we have our medications, whether it's eating
crutches.
When I get distressed or working when I get distressed or wine or, some beer or whatever that alcohol or cigarettes or pride or whatever we do, self-righteousness, whatever we do to medicate ourselves.
Yes.
Denial.
What's interesting is I'm once again going back and looking at the sorrowful mysteries. Sorry, if we change the analogy for a second and look at the stations of the cross, there are stations of consolation amidst the overall story that isn't good. And what I think the difference is, for me, I will go through the station of McDonald's and go, oh yeah, that's like the sixth station. Jake goes through the drive-through and tries to medicate his pain, where Jesus's station is he meets his mother.
Yeah.
Veronica wipes his face. Very big difference.
One is true comfort.
There we go.
Consolation, seeing us, being with us, helping us go through.
Yes.
The other is running from.
Yeah, it's numbing.
Disconnecting. Yeah.
And here's the principle is something is healing when it doesn't undermine or minimize the reality of the pain, but offers a genuine response to it, but keeps it fully in the light.
Yeah.
One of the factors that I find that's that you and I talk about and teach, et cetera, is the presence of love.
Yeah.
And I can adapt that a little bit to say the presence of good relationship.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the Stations of the Cross, that's what you see. These consoling stations are the presence of good relationship. Then you have some of the other ones where it's the presence of bad relationship, which makes it more hard, more difficult. But this is what I find so interesting about the places that we go to medicate. One of the indicators of them being a false place of healing or whatever is the absence of real love. So the story I always say, and somebody out there will probably prove this wrong, but thus far in every talk I've ever given where I've shared this, I've said, has anybody ever fallen in love with the McDonald's drive-thru person? And the answer is no. Now I'm sure somebody out there did, but because that's not why you're there. That's not the point of the interaction. The point of the interaction is just transactional. I want this, you have it. Here's my credit card, give it to me and I will go medicate my pain. Yeah. And I'm hounding on food. It's one that I struggle with, but there's many other vices. Just look at the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Or maybe we fall in love with Egg McMuffins or the Big Macs, right?
Right. And there's those can't love you.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, we do. They're like, man, you're tasty. You're so good. You're so good to me.
Yeah.
And the interesting part is let's take it to one that's a bit more obvious and see the empty attempt at healing that people go to. This is why St. Thomas Aquinas, it makes sense where he says every sin that somebody does, they're looking for a good.
Yep.
And so often, why are you driving through the McDonald's? We can have compassion on those of us who do that and compassion on our sinfulness because we're looking for a good. Often it's the relief of pain.
Yep.
So pornography is one of the best indicators of this. And obviously it's very big in my story. It's an attempt at relationship, but it doesn't have any relationship.
Yeah.
It sure looks like relationship. It almost looks like the pinnacle of relationship. But the irony is it requires nothing of the viewer.
Yeah. And offers nothing from the one who's being
There's no
fantasized
reciprocity.
About.
Yeah. No, all it is using and fantasy, but it's a really powerful fantasy. Yeah. That's why it's so popular.
Yeah.
So it's not healing because love isn't actually present. It's a very deceptive perspective.
Yeah. And it releases all the chemicals in the brain that seem to deal with the pain and everything in the moment until it goes away and the pain gets worse.
The pain gets worse. And then shame comes on and knocks on your door and goes, ha, I'm now to be your best friend. And so again, what is healing? How does that land? The restoration of our God-given glory, the process, the events, the relationships, the experiences.
Yeah. And you're describing the process, which is the love that comes from relationships. And so we talk about healing as an encounter with love, with God's love.
Yes.
That brings us into wholeness and communion.
Yes.
Right? That's the process.
Yep. And so if we're doing technically healing prayer, the point of it is not necessarily the right technique. The point is the encounter with a person.
Yeah. Which forecasts our next episode.
Yeah,
right?
It does it?
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. So stay tuned, listeners, because the next episode is we talk to Dr. Carl Lehman about Emmanuel healing, which we'll get into that. We'll save that for next episode. But what do you find are the misunderstandings around healing that trip people up or cause them to disengage from the process or whatever? So we've tried to lay out a definition of healing. Again, we're going to keep coming back to this. It's just the nature of what this podcast is all about.
Yeah.
Where do people get tripped up, do you think?
Well, I think even in the church, related to suffering, we get tripped up as we were talking about it. And
Okay.
I think we have sometimes a very skewed sense of what healing is, through suffering healing is, redemptive suffering is.
Yes.
Just misery in our pain is not redemptive suffering.
That's good.
Right? Self-pity is not redemptive suffering.
Victim mentality.
Victim mentality is not redemptive suffering. Redemptive suffering, the best example, and we've talked about this with forgiveness is redemptive suffering. It's rather than having the quick satisfaction of revenge or retaliation or bitterness, which numbs our hearts, we are willing to walk into the pain long enough, not to hold on to it, not to be victim by it,
yes,
but to experience it so that we can release it and release the other person in the process, so that we can love in the face of where we haven't been loved. Right? And so that is a redemptive suffering. It causes us some pain, but in the end, it causes us a freedom and a joy, and not causes us, but brings us into a freedom and a joy. So I would say that would be one. Is I think in the church, a lot of times we either think of suffering and healing as opposites, which is not true, as we've just been saying, good. Or we look at suffering in the wrong way, which doesn't really bring healing. It just keeps us stuck in our brokenness and in a false kind of victimization or something. Yes. How about you? What would you say are some misconceptions?
Yeah, I think one is if I just figure out the magical process, the magical 1, 2, 3 steps, then all my problems will go away. And if the problems aren't going away, my pain isn't going away, there's something wrong with the process and I need to keep tinkering and tweaking. Oh, I did step 3 instead of step 2.
Yeah.
But if I just had gotten that right, and then, oh gosh, I did all the steps right, it's still not going the way I anticipate or expect, something's wrong.
Yeah.
The healing isn't working. God isn't good.
Yeah.
Which ironically, if you look at that, notice the conclusions that are arrived at, which is more lies.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there.
And notice even from the very beginning, what you said is, I need to figure this out.
Yes.
Which is that ungodly self-reliance. I need to figure this out.
Yeah. In other words, God is like this, one analogy is God is like this really kind vending machine.
Yeah.
And if I have the right coins and push the right buttons, I get the result I want and I walk away and I'm happy.
Yeah.
And so what happens when you put in your coins and push the buttons and your potato chips don't fall out? You start punching the machine.
Yeah.
You start shaking it, trying to get the potato chips to fall out or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. For most of it's more like the slot machine, where we keep pulling it and putting more coins in, more coins.
There you go.
And why aren't you answering?
Yeah. Come on. I want the $1 million thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the dilemma with all of that is, this is something I've learned about God and healing. God is kind. He will also not allow himself to be used and abused.
Yeah.
He has integrity.
Yeah.
And so we can go approach him and try to pull his strings.
Yeah.
And puppet him, control him. This is the language that's been coming up recently for me in my own prayer life is God is letting me learn I can't control him.
Yeah.
So one of the pitfalls, I think, is you get people who understand healing quite well. They've done it. They understand some things about it, the process, and then they go, oh, I've got it. And subtly what's going on in the heart is, now I can control God.
Uh-huh.
I get the vending machine to work every time.
Yeah.
And that's a dilemma, because now that's void of relationship. And you could argue it begins a process of using.
Yeah.
As opposed to a relationship.
Yeah, that's really good. And, think back to some of our episodes about the healing process or the process of forgiveness. Yep. And, it's the danger of talking about process is because then we can have some kind of control over it, we think.
Yeah.
And then use that as a way of getting God to give us what we want, rather than those processes that are really ways of surrendering to God.
Amen.
Of letting go of the places where we're in control.
Yes.
And allowing him to be the one moving the process rather than us.
God is so kind. He'll bless even our feeble, disordered efforts, and we can then really take things too far. Like you see this in various domains of prayer or whatever, where it becomes too focused on the person, not focused enough on God. And then it almost, the dynamic starts to get out of hand. It gets crazier and wilder, like the centripetal force gets and then everything just starts flying off the handle because there's a loss of the center of where the power comes from. So here's another way to say the same concept. I was talking to my spiritual director and we were talking about trust. And I said, trust is so hard. And obviously it comes from brokenness, et cetera, my story in my life. And I said, what is crazy to me is Saint Therese. Here's what's crazy about her. She said, I will choose poverty and littleness and put all my eggs in the basket of you love me and I surrender to you. And I can't do it on my own, so I'll let you do it for me. That is so, and I said to my spiritual director, that is so risky. It's so risky because she basically said zero self-reliance. I will sit in the middle of my emptiness, my poverty, my littleness, and I will let you save me. I will not save myself. And I thought that is so risky. But John Paul II just said that she has articulated the heart of the gospel in her canonization homilies. And what is, it says something like, what else could be the heart of the gospel than God is Father and we are his beloved children? And I go, that's healing. She is experiencing healing in her embracing of her poverty and saying, you save me.
For many of us, we need a lot of healing to get to that place.
Right. There needs to be a lot of touch points of love and trust before, and that's why it's risky. That's why I'm like, I say it tongue in cheek and I'm being dramatic. She's crazy. Like the level of trust is wild.
That is. But that's the gospel message, and that's ultimate healing. Ultimate healing is this place where I can completely trust God. For everything.
Right. This is why I think the surrender novena is so popular right now. It's basically Therese's spirituality. It's the same concept of you take care of it. Right. Now, isn't it funny the different tones you can put to that? Like, fine, you take care of it. I can't stand you. You know, like, okay, that's one tone. Or trust, like you take care of it. So, Bob, any final thoughts there about what is healing? Again, we'll keep breaking this open as we go throughout the podcast, but any final thoughts?
No, I really like that it's restoring the glory, and the process of that is encountering love to the place of wholeness and integration, and suffering is a part of that. And so suffering sometimes is the door into, a lot of times it's the door into our healing, not the absence of our healing.
Amen. Yeah. I would say we have to be very aware of the movements of our heart and the ways that our heart is trying to bypass, seek shortcuts, drink the quote unquote wine, because we're not made for suffering. And so we become experts at adapting and maneuvering, which ends up compromising the process of receiving love and what is good for us. And so one of the things I found very helpful is to try to be aware of the ways that I am taking matters into my own hands. I'm self-reliantly going through the process. And that can be very hard, very hard to see and very hard to let go and trust. But nevertheless, if God is who he says he is, it's the best decision we could ever make, is to put all things into his hands and to trust that he will love us.
Amen.
So there we go. That's our crack at what is healing. So listeners, thanks for staying with us, being with us. Again, if you're loving the podcast, you can check us out on our website, restoretheglorypodcast.com. We also have Patreon where you get extra content. But Bob, it's good to be back from the summer, and I'm looking forward to where we're going. Next episode's Dr. Carl Lehman. So listeners, until next time, God bless you.